All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unravel a completely fascinating everyday mystery. Why do we do this strange, joyful act we call laughing? I mean, think about it for just a second. You hear a specific combination of words, and suddenly, literally out of nowhere, your facial muscles contract, you bare your teeth, and you just start emitting these loud, rhythmic barks. Objectively speaking, laughter is a super bizarre human behavior. Yet it's one of the most absolutely fundamental parts of the human experience. So today, we're going to look under the hood of humor. We're going to deconstruct the exact mechanics of what makes things funny. We'll be drawing on centuries of philosophy and some cutting-edge cognitive science to figure out exactly what's happening in our brains when we hear a truly great joke. Let's get into it.
So, why do we laugh? From an evolutionary and psychological standpoint, it's actually a really profound mystery why humans instinctively just emit bursts of noise when someone tells a story. Evolutionary biologists suggest that laughter might have originated in non-human primates, basically as a way to signal safety during rough-and-tumble play. It was essentially their way of communicating, hey, this physical attack, it's just a game. But human humor has evolved into something incredibly complex. We don't just laugh when we're physically tickled anymore, right? We laugh at abstract concepts, crazy linguistic wordplay, and absolutely absurd social observations. So what's the underlying thread here? What is the actual formula that bridges the gap between a physical tickle and a clever punchline?
Well, centuries ago, philosopher Immanuel Kant elegantly defined this comedic event, and he really set the stage for modern science. Writing way back in the late 1700s, Kant highlighted that amusement is actually a kind of sensory gratification. He proposed this idea that humor happens when we build up a strict expectation about the world, and then, suddenly, that expectation just disappears into thin air, or it resolves into something entirely unexpected. Kant recognized that laughter is essentially a physiological release. It's a physiological response to an absurdity that our brain has literally just processed. Honestly, he was remarkably ahead of his time here, giving us a vital clue about the mental gymnastics required to actually experience humor.
Section 1. The Big Three Theories. To really understand the mechanics of humor, we first need to briefly acknowledge how historians and philosophers have historically attempted to solve this puzzle. Let's take a quick look.
For centuries, two dominant theories really ruled the conversation. First, we had Superiority Theory, which was famously championed by Thomas Hobbes in the 17th century. Hobbes basically believed laughter was the sudden glory we feel when we realize we're better off than someone else. In other words, we're laughing at the misfortune or stupidity of others just to reinforce our own social standing. Kinda dark, right? Then came Relief Theory, heavily pushed by Sigmund Freud. Now, Freud believed human beings are constantly bottling up psychic energy and aggressive urges just to conform to polite society. So humor, in his view, acts as a pressure valve. The laugh is quite literally the sound of built-up socio-cultural tension being released in a socially acceptable way. But while Freud believed humor was a pressure valve, and Hobbes thought it was just us feeling superior, these theories don't quite explain the whole magic trick. After all, not all humor involves victims, and not all humor relieves deep psychological stress. There's got to be more to it.
Section 2. Enter Incongruity Theory. This brings us to the most predominant framework used today. It completely turns away from those ideas of superiority and tension and focuses instead on patterns. Because think about it, if we're going to explain a simple victimless pun or a purely absurd observation, we need a theory that looks at how the human brain processes information, anticipates the future, and reacts to surprises.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that laughter is actually our brain reacting to cognitive dissonance when our predictions about a situation are suddenly violated. According to Incongruity Theory, our brains are basically just constant prediction machines. We use scripts and norms to anticipate what's going to happen next in any given scenario. Humor happens when there's an incongruous juxtaposition, basically when the concept involved in a situation suddenly clashes with the real objects or punchline presented. We expect the world to behave one specific way, and the joke teller suddenly shifts our understanding to a secondary, completely opposing script. The humor lies entirely in that specific moment of shifting your perspective to resolve the clash. It's a real cognitive workout.
Section 3. The Anatomy of a Joke. If incongruity theory is right, then every single joke basically functions like a miniature logic puzzle. Let's actually break down the anatomy of a comedic event to see those mechanical gears turning. Every conventional joke follows this exact cognitive problem-solving process, where an expectation is established, suddenly violated, and then mentally resolved. First, we have the setup. This gathers information and creates a safe, highly predictable mental picture. Next comes the twist, or the reckoning phase. This is the exact moment the incongruity is introduced and your initial prediction is completely shattered.
Finally, there's the resolution. Your brain scrambles to answer the question, wait, if my first idea was wrong, then what's right? This is the moment of the cognitive shift, where the opposing scripts overlap and you get that satisfying, oh, I get it moment.
Let's look at this in action with a classic one-liner. I went to the zoo the other day. There was only one dog in it. Okay, in this setup, the comedian gives us information that creates a completely safe, mundane, mental picture of a zoo, establishing a super clear expectation. You're envisioning cages, animals, maybe a stray dog wandering around by the snack bar. Your brain is comfortably loaded its standard zoo script. There's no tension here at all. It's totally safe and predictable.
Then comes the punchline. It was a Shih Tzu. Bam. The punchline immediately violates our assumptions by shifting our perspective from a literal animal enclosure to clever wordplay. The primary script of a literal zoo violently collides with the secondary script of the dog breed Shih Tzu, relying entirely on the phonetic overlap of a Shih Tzu. Your brain instantly recognizes that its initial prediction was wrong, quickly deciphers the linguistic ambiguity, and lands on that second understanding. Boom! You've successfully resolved the incongruity.
Section 4. Resolving the absurdity. But here's the thing. Why does solving that linguistic puzzle make us erupt into laughter instead of just, nodding in agreement? I mean, we solve problems all day long. We do math, we navigate crazy traffic. So why is humor any different?
While this brilliantly illustrates that a bored mind is a humorless mind. Our brains literally reward us with joy for successfully navigating confusion and finding the hidden meaning. As researchers point out, we really often mistakenly think of the human mind as this rigid, logical computer. But it's not. The brain doesn't break down when faced with ambiguity. It actually uses conflicting information to generate novel solutions. Humor succeeds because human beings inherently take joy in this exact process. We take profound pleasure in working through the confusion of a setup, and our brain delivers a massive rush of positive emotion, the reward of amusement, when we finally crack the code. Laughter is literally the sound of our cognitive reward system firing on all cylinders.
Section 5. The benign violation extension. Now, there is a catch here. If I suddenly knock over my coffee cup and completely ruin my laptop, that definitely violates my expectations, but it certainly isn't funny. Clearly, incongruity alone isn't enough to guarantee a laugh.
To answer that, researchers developed what's called the Benign Violation Theory. It explains that an incongruity must be threatening enough to surprise us, but safe enough not to cause any real harm. Developed by Peter McGraw and Caleb Warren, this theory is an absolutely powerful extension of incongruity. It states that a violation threatens our sense of how the world ought to be. But for that violation to trigger amusement instead of fear, confusion, or anger, it must simultaneously be appraised as benign. It has to be okay, acceptable, or psychologically distant. If you remove either element, the violation or the safety, the comedy just completely fails.
This concept perfectly maps out the exact sweet spot of comedy. A completely safe space is just boring, pure violation is offensive, but the overlap? That creates comedic conflict. Think about it. Purely benign is like a story about walking up the stairs safely. Yawn, boring, but pure violation? If I tell you a story about falling down the stairs and breaking my leg, that's just tragic and upsetting. But that overlap in the middle? That's where I trip on the stairs, stumble wildly, but catch my balance at the absolute last second without getting hurt. It's a clear violation of physical safety, but it resolves as benign. And that sweet spot is exactly where laughter lives.
This is exactly why tickling or sarcasm works so well. Your brain registers an attack or a broken norm, but simultaneously realizes you're actually completely safe. Let's look at how broadly this applies in reality. Bookish people absolutely love puns because a pun misuses language, which is a total violation to someone who loves grammar, but it adheres to an alternative phonetic rule, making it benign. Tickling is literally a simulated physical attack. It's a primal violation, but because it doesn't actually cause pain and is usually done by someone we trust, it's benign. Sarcasm violates the normal rules of honest, straightforward conversation, but an exaggerated tone cues the listener that it's safe and playful. In every single case, the brain holds two opposing truths at the exact same time. This is wrong, and this is okay.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I leave you to wonder, does pulling back the curtain on our comedic programming ruin the fun, or does it just prove how beautifully complex we really are? We started with the simple question of why humans make loud barking noises at each other.
Now we see that laughter is actually the outward manifestation of an incredible cognitive process. It's our brain's way of navigating ambiguity, surviving social and physical violations, finding safety, and literally rewarding us with joy for figuring out the puzzle. Humor isn't just a frivolous distraction, guys. It is an absolute masterclass in human cognition. Thank you so much for joining me, and hey, keep looking for those clever incongruities in your own life.